Hello, grade 7. How are you today? I hope you all are safe and well. We studied about the solar system and the stars. Today we will study about the moon. So open your books on page 62, grab your highlighters and follow me, please. In this lesson we will study about phases of the moon, and we will explain why we don't see the dark side of the moon and what's the meaning of eclipse. We heard about something called eclipse, but how does it happen exactly? We will see together in this lesson. So, the moon. Moonlight. Unlike the sun, you can see the moon in the sky during the day and during the night. You see the moon because light from the sun is reflected into your eyes. Moonlight is actually reflected light, not light that is produced by the moon. The moon does not give out light. When we studied the solar system and we studied the night sky lesson, we mentioned that the moon is an object we can see in the night sky shining. It's an object, it's made of rock, but it doesn't give out light. We only see it shining bright in the night sky, or sometimes even at dawn, or during the day also, because this object can reflect light from the sun. Like the planets, some planets can reflect light from the sun, so in this case, in this way we can see them. The same thing is happening with the moon. The moon can reflect light from the sun, so we can see it shining bright. In the night sky, day after day, if we looked at the moon, we can see it in different shapes. It's we can see it. It's like changing its shape. So does it change shape really, or just we are seeing this only? So this changing of the shape of the shape of the moon, we call it the phases of the moon, which is like stages, okay? Because the moon is passing through stages, and we will explain this here. The phases of the moon. The moon orbits the Earth every 27.3 days. If you take a picture of the moon each night, you would see that its shape changes in a regular way. These are called the phases of the moon. So what are these phases of the moon, or stages of the moon? We all know that we can see the moon is changing shape during a month, okay? We call it month. These day 27.3 or 29 days, we call it 1 month. So why does it change the shape? Each time the moon orbits the Earth, it can pass through phases according to the sunlight, okay, where the sunlight is hitting it, because we all know that the moon lies between the Earth and the sun, okay? So according to the sunlight, we can see the moon is full or half or quarter or like a very thin crescent, okay? The light from the sun lights up half of the moon, just as it lights up half of the Earth or any other planet or moon in the solar system. So only one half is in the light, and the other half in the dark, as well as the Earth. When it orbits the sun, half of it in the dark and half of it in the light. It's the same thing with the moon. So the moon appears to change shape because it's lit by the sun and it's moving around the Earth. Here we have a very good question. why the moon appears to change shape? So the answer lies here, because it's lit by the sun and it's moving around the earth. Okay, now what are these phases or the 4 stages of the moon? Moon can pass through 4 stages or 4 phases. It has 4 phases. So what are these phases? We have the first thing when we see it we can name it, is called new moon. In this case, when the moon lies or comes between the earth and the sun, okay? When it comes between the earth and the sun, we don't see it because the sun is behind the moon, so we cannot see any light. It doesn't reflect any light from the sun, so we can see only darkness. This is a new moon. Then we can see a really thin or a thin line or thin crescent, and then we can see half of the moon. We can call it first quarter. Then we can see it very big, round, shining bright. In this case we call it full moon, and then it will start to shrink or to getting smaller and smaller, so it will be the second half of the moon and second of it in the dark, so we call it last quarter. So these are the 4 stages, 4 phases or stages. When the moon is between the earth and the sun, the moon is in shadow, so no light, so it appears dark or black, and we call this a new moon. Then in position X, we see half of the moon lit up. This is the first quarter. Okay, this is the earth, okay, and where is the new moon? This is the new moon. So here the sun, the light from the sun. So look at this. The moon comes between the earth and the sun, so this half is in the light and this half is in the dark. So in this case we don't see any light from the moon. We call it a new moon. Then it will start to move because it orbits the earth. Here, when it moves in this position, okay, away from the sun, okay, so the sun ray will hit this side and this side in the dark, so we can see half of it shining, so we call it first quarter. Okay, what about the next position? Next position, we can see the shining half of the moon, so we call it full moon. We can see it round and big in the sky. You cannot even ignore it. You can see the light is bright and shining bright in the sky. So this phase called full moon, and then it will start to shrink or to get smaller because of the not the moon, I mean the light itself. It will get smaller and smaller until it will be in the dark again. But before this, we can see the last quarter, which is opposite of the first quarter. We can see the darkness and the half of it in the light, so we call it the last quarter. And then it will get smaller or get in the dark again, so we can see another new moon in the beginning of the month. When the moon is on the opposite side of the earth to the sun, we see the whole face of the moon lit up. We call this full moon. So here in a new moon phase, we only see the darkness, the dark side, or we don't see it at all because the light is blocked from the sun by the moon. But here with the full moon, we can see it because it's in the opposite side of the earth, not between the earth and the sun. So the new moon comes when the moon is lies between the earth and the sun, and the full moon when it's opposite side of the earth, so the sunshine can reflect light, the moon can reflect light from the sun. In position Y, we again see half of the moon lit up. This is the last quarter. Okay, between them we have stages also. We call it waxing, crescent, waxing, gibbous, waning, gibbous, waning, crescent. So what's the meaning of these names? Okay, as the moon moves between a new moon and full moon, we say that it's waxing. So here, between a new moon and full moon, so here, from the new moon to the full moon, it can go through a stage called waxing. But from the full moon to be in new moon again, we call it waning. Okay, so as the moon moves between a new moon and a full moon, we say it's waxing. We see more and more of the moon lit up. As it moves from a full moon to a new moon, we say it's waning. Okay, what's the meaning of waxing and waning? Look at this picture here. We can see like a very thin crescent, and it's getting bigger, bigger, bigger until we can see a full moon, and then it will get smaller, 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 smaller until we can see a new moon again. So when it moves from a new moon until it reaches to be a full moon, we call it waxing, which is getting bigger or growing. But when it starts to shrink or to get smaller and smaller and smaller until it become a new moon again, from full to a new moon again, we call it waning, which is getting smaller or shrinking. Between a new moon and the first or last quarter, we only see a small part of the moon lit up. This is a crescent moon. Between the first or last quarter and the full moon, most of the moon lit up. This is a gibbous moon. Okay, let's talk about eclipses. So what's the meaning of eclipse or eclipses? We all heard this word before, maybe in movies as title of movie or in a scientific report. So what is the moon eclipse? The moon eclipse is a phenomena that happens when the earth comes between the sun and the moon. So here it can happen only with the full moon stage or the full moon phase. So a little bit light we can see the moon as like red or orange, not bright, white bright. So when an object moves in front of a source of light, a shadow is formed. So we all know this is how can the shadow forms when we put or when we block the light using an opaque object. This can happen when the moon or the earth moves in front of the sun. So the moon sometimes can block the sunlight, or the earth can block the sunlight. When the moon blocks the light from the sun, this can cause a solar eclipse. We call it a solar eclipse. So why do we call it solar eclipse on Earth? Because solar eclipse, because the light from the sun is blocked. Anything related to the sun, we call it solar. So when the moon here comes between the earth and the sun and blocks the sunlight, we call it a solar eclipse. So there is a region of deep shadow where the moon blocks the light from the sun, and this is where you see a total eclipse. A phenomena called eclipse where the moon covered the sunlight during the daytime. So this is called total eclipse, and this happens every maybe after years, many years, when the sun in the same line with the moon and the earth, when the three of them comes together, line up together. In this case, the moon will block the sunlight of the earth, and this can cause a darkness during the daytime. So we only see the dark side of the moon, and in this case will block the sunlight. Outside that region, you see a partial eclipse. The deep shadow is called umbra, and the lighter shadow is called penumbra. In some countries, one of the past years, we heard about a total eclipse. In some countries, they had total darkness during the day, but in our countries we saw it as a crescent. This is called a partial eclipse. So here, if we saw a deep shadow, like a very sharp deep shadow, we call it umbra, and if it's partial or lighter shadow, we call it penumbra. We see eclipses because the moon happens to be the right size of the distance away from the earth to exactly cover up the sun. This is a complete accident. Okay, so sometimes this can happen from, as I said, from year to year, or after years. The sunlight can be blocked, and the moon could be at the right size of the distance away from the earth. When the earth is between the sun and the moon, we have a lunar eclipse. So first we said when the moon lies between the sun and the earth, we call it solar eclipse. But if the earth here, like this here, okay, earth lies between the moon and the sun, we call it lunar eclipse. It's called a lunar eclipse because we don't see any of the light that is reflected from the moon. The moon is in the shadow of the earth. So in this case, we can see it as orange or red moon. So look at the picture here. We have here, when they lined up together, the earth comes between the moon and the sun, so the moon will be blocked from the sun here. Okay, why are eclipses rare? Okay, I said that we don't see the eclipses too much or much. We can see them after years. So why they are rare? You might expect to see a solar eclipse every 27.3 days. So sometimes we can see a solar eclipse. Why is this? Because the moon orbits the earth in that time. So we said earlier that the moon orbits the earth every 27.3 days. So we can see it, we might see it. In fact, total eclipses do not happen very often. Okay, we just said that we might see it. So why they do not happen very often? This is because the orbit of the moon is tilted slightly. Okay, here is tilting, here it's tilting, it's tilting. It's not. It doesn't orbit the sun, the earth in circular, exact circular way, but it's slightly tilted. So the Earth, Sun, and the Moon need to be lined up for an eclipse to happen. So eclipses are rare. So when they line up only, in this case, only we can see the eclipses. If the orbit of the Moon was not tilted, then the Earth would block out the light, and we would not see a full moon. So here, if the moon here, okay, if the moon is here in this line, so in this case the Earth will block the sunlight from the moon, so we cannot see a full moon. We will only see one side or one face or three faces. We cannot see the full moon. We can see in this case we only can see the new moon and the first and last quarters. So that's why it's tilted. Okay, so what about the far side of the moon or the dark side of the moon? Can we see it, or does anyone saw it before? We only ever see one side of the moon. The other side is sometimes called the dark side of the moon. So why we call it the dark side of the moon? Because we cannot see it from Earth. Not because it's dark. Actually, it's facing the sun. The other side is facing the sun each time the sun is in orbit orbits the Earth. But we only can see one side because the Earth is the moon orbits the Earth, so it moves around the Earth and it doesn't spin around its axis fast. And also, the gravity of the Earth is pulling the moon to keep it in orbit in the same orbit, so it can spin on its axis once each time when it's orbit the Earth. Half of the moon is lit up all the time. The first photograph of the far side of the moon was taken by space probe in 1959. It was not until the Apollo 8 space mission to the moon in 1968 that a human being saw the surface. So here we only saw the half of the moon, but they took a photograph of it, of the far side, in 1959, and then in 1968 humans went to the moon, and they were standing on it. We don't see the other side of the moon. Why? So here is the answer. Because the moon spins on its axis as it orbits the Earth. So when it orbits the Earth, it's moving on a track, or in a round shape, or around the Earth. So in this case it will spin on its axis, but not as fast as the Earth. It happens to take exactly the same time to spin once as it does to orbit the Earth. So it can spin on its axis for a whole month, like once during the whole month. We said that the Earth can spin every 24 hours, but the Earth spins every 1 month. Like during a whole month it can spin once only, or one time only. This means that we always see the same side facing towards the Earth. Now, to explain more about the phases of the moon and the far side of the moon, I'm gonna leave you with with a video to show you more and explain more about it and to make it clear to understand it.
It's the brightest and most noticeable object in the night sky, but if you spend much time observing it, you will see that the moon is never quite the same from one night to the next. The moon has something we call phases, which means that it appears to change shape a little bit every night. To understand why this happens, we need to talk a little bit about the way the Earth and the moon move together in space. The moon orbits around the Earth, much like the Earth orbits around the Sun. However, while the Earth takes about 365 days to travel once around the Sun, 1 year, the moon completes its orbit around the Earth in only 29.5 days, or about 1 month. That's actually where the idea of months came from, the time it takes for the moon to complete one orbit around the Earth. And the words moon and month come from the same root. Despite how bright it looks in the sky, the moon does not have any light of its own. It only appears to shine brightly in the sky because light from the sun hits it and bounces off. Just like the Earth, the moon has a day side and a night side, with half of it in sunlight and half of it in darkness at any one time. As the moon travels through its orbit around the Earth, that dividing line between day and night, called the terminator, is visible from different angles, giving the impression that different amounts of the moon are lit up on different days. The cycle of lunar phases begins with the new moon. At new moon, the moon appears completely dark because the unlit side is facing the Earth. New moon is the only time in the lunar cycle when a solar eclipse could happen, because it is the only time that the moon is between the sun and the Earth. After a few days, once the moon has moved along a little in its orbit, we can begin to see some of the moon's day side from Earth. What we see is just a thin slice of light called a crescent. We call it a waxing crescent because waxing means growing. The crescent moon will grow a little bit thicker every night until it reaches the next phase, first quarter. The first quarter moon is sometimes called the half moon because it appears to us that half of the moon is illuminated. But it is called first quarter because the moon is 1/4 of the way through its cycle. As the days pass, the moon continues to grow, soon entering its next phase, the waxing gibbous. Gibbous means humped or swollen, and again, we call it waxing because it grows thicker every night until it reaches the next phase, the full moon. A full moon is the biggest, brightest, and easiest phase of the moon to see. The moon rises at sunset and is up all night, so if you are outside and the sky is clear, it's hard to miss. The moon is halfway through its orbit around the Earth, and is now on the opposite side of the Earth from the sun. During a full moon is the only time that a lunar eclipse can happen, because that is the only time that the Earth's shadow could fall on the moon. As the moon continues in its path, it appears to shrink again as we begin to see more and more of its dark side. A few days after the full moon, the moon will be a gibbous again, but this time it's a waning gibbous. Waning means shrinking or getting smaller, and so the moon will be waning for the rest of its orbit. The next phase is another half moon, but this time it's called third quarter, or sometimes last or final quarter, because the moon is 3/4 of the way through its orbit. Soon, the half moon shrinks into a waning crescent, which will continue to shrink night after night until it vanishes completely into the next new moon. Big and bright and beautiful, different every night, but repeating the same cycle over and over, the moon
Now I'm gonna leave you with this explanation for videos talking about why we only see one side of the moon and we don't see the far side of the moon.
In 1959, the Soviet spacecraft Luna 3 beamed back images of something Earthlings had never before seen, the far side of the moon. We always see the same old side of the moon because the moon rotates exactly once on its axis each time it orbits Earth. If it weren't spinning at all, we'd get at least one 360-degree view of its surface with each lap. If it were spinning twice as fast, we'd also see the moon's entire surface more than once per orbit. But instead, our moon's motions, like the spin and orbit of most other moons in our solar system, are remarkably in perfect sync. This wasn't always the case. Our best guess is that our own moon formed due to a massive asteroid impact, and its initial spin and dizzying 10-hour orbit were almost certainly not in sync with each other, though we don't know which was faster. At such close range, Earth's gravity deformed the moon into a slight oval, with one of its bulges facing Earth. Those bulges quickly swung out of alignment thanks to the moon's asynchronous spin and orbit, but Earth's gravity continually squeezed them back again. What's more, this gravitational tugging would have influenced the moon's rotation rate. If it was spinning more than once per orbit, Earth would pull at a slight angle against the moon's direction of rotation, slowing its spin. If the moon was spinning less than once per orbit, Earth would have pulled the other way, speeding its rotation. Whatever the case, it took just 1,000 years for the Earth's pull to adjust the moon's spin enough that one rotation of the moon corresponded to one trip around the Earth, leaving one side forever locked facing away.
So after watching these videos, now we need to see the summary of the lesson or read the summary of the lesson. The moon has phases such as a full moon, half moon, and new moon. So half moon, it's like the first and last quarter. We see phases because the moon orbits the Earth. We only see one side of the moon because the moon spins once every 28 days. So what is umbra? Umbra is deep shadow and penumbra is partial or lighter shadow. So this was all about the moon, and I hope you understood the lesson. Don't forget to write these notes in your notebooks, and if you have any question, write it down. I hope to see you next time very soon. Please stay safe, and I will meet you in a new lesson. Bye bye.